All right. Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you both. But mainly thank you to everybody for running this. We've got a huge team who runs this. We've got Fee, Margarita, we've got Fred in APAC. Thank you to Simon and Sarah and Lorna. And I should have written all these down, but also a huge thank you to Caesar and Emily, who runs the whole thing, who'll be coming on in the US soon. These events are amazing. I love taking part in them, and this is no exception. So thank you to everybody who puts these things on. It's really appreciated by the community, literally all around the world. All right, and I love nothing better than coming to these things and just putting a Tableau t-shirt on. But today I've got a Tableau t-shirt on and about 4 jumpers because it is absolutely freezing. But it is me, I promise you. I haven't got the usual Tableau attire on. But anyway, I want to talk to you today about how curiosity will help your creativity. So if you're curious as to what that QR code is on the bottom, by all means, check it out, and you'll see the theme that Simon has hinted about. It's very much sort of tied around my book, which I have coming out, called Questions in Data Viz, where I basically write about my journey and all the questions that I sort of came across, and how kind of putting this down in a form of questions and discussions has really sort of helped me think outside the box. It's helped me become more curious. It's helped me learn a whole load more different skills and get a whole load more creative ideas. So in sort of putting that down together, I hope that you guys can sort of share my ideas, or at least get an idea of the kind of process that I've undertaken on the way. So it's all about questions. I split it out into 3 different types of questions. One which I've called first questions, challenging questions, idea questions. First questions, really what you might consider the first principles, or the kind of rules, if you like. Very often you might sort of come across some of these things as you're learning. But are you have you thought about whether you really have to apply them all, or is there more to these than you might have thought? Challenging questions. Again, there may be some, maybe some of the rules that you might have learned or picked up, but not necessarily your kind of, sort of best principles. So, things that lead on from that, and things that you might not have thought about before until you've sort of done a few visualizations. You think, oh yeah, I wonder. And then idea questions, it's kind of the combination of those two. So questions that have led to some ideas from me of doing something different, of putting something out which is creative or unconventional, or whatever you might like. And throughout, I ask a lot of questions. I don't actually have a lot of answers. I just like to sort of get the creative thoughts going. There aren't usually many answers to things in data visualization, apart from it depends. So I encourage you to agree with me. I especially encourage you to disagree with me. You're welcome to come away from this talk and think everything should be a bar chart, but you might also get some ideas or some inspiration, or a sudden desire to buy a certain book. Who knows? All right, so I'm going to start with what's in a color. We've spoken a lot about colors today, and thank you to Irene for that last talk. And there's been a few other mentions of color as well. I'm just going to sort of add some of my own thoughts about this, what's in a color. And I can start with good practices. These are probably a lot of the things which are absolutely true, and some of the things that you should bear in mind, especially in business context. We all know about using color sparingly, reducing saturation, and maybe just using a single highlight color like that for highlighting what you want to highlight. Keep your color palettes down low. Consider accessibility. Red and green is the famous one of those. We often talk about how difficult it can be to distinguish those of people with color blindness deficiencies. So these are all very good things, which I urge you to think about in your visualizations. But as always, so many other things kind of come up. And my first example of this is from years ago. Don't be fooled by the 2023 on this, because that's the image I managed to get off Wikipedia. But honestly, we're talking, I don't know, 1900 and something. And I was a team leader in one of my old jobs. And one of the important jobs I had to do was hand round the desk diaries to everybody. And this is where we wrote our deadlines and things like that. Probably before the internet, if I'm honest, and before we did all these things online, just to make sure each one of my team was able to organize themselves a bit more differently. So I went round to all my team and I just randomly gave them a different sort of coloured desk diary, and I just had one left. And I'd left one guy till last. He's probably the most. He was quite sort of intimidating. He's about 2 meters tall. He's a really nice guy, but he was, you know, he didn't take any. I can't use that word; it's too early. But anyway, he knew what he wanted. He could be a little bit intimidating, but it was fine really. But I walked up to him and I gave him the last red diary, and he just looked at me and shook his head. I want to say he looked up at me. He didn't. He looked down at me, and he just went no. And I walked back with my tail between my legs. I thought, what have I done? And all the others in my team, they knew what I'd done. They were looking at me, and as if they thought, oh, I can't believe it. He's trying to give this guy something red. And the reason you don't give this guy anything red, it's summed up with these two football shirts. Liverpool in red, Everton in blue. If you're from Liverpool, chances are you like one of these teams, you don't like the other team. Ian, it was his name. He liked the blue team. Everton, he did not like the red team. And I didn't realize he would not own anything red. He would not eat anything red. He would not just sort of, entertain the idea of having anything red around him. And so the worst thing I could do was try and give him a red desk diary. And so it was an early lesson that color cultures are sort of deeply ingrained for sometimes the most surprising of reasons. And actually, out of this is the Santa dash in Liverpool. You know, a lot of cities have these things, you know, it's a good fun, dress up in a Santa costume and run around for charity. I've done it myself in Oxford. In Liverpool, can you spot there's quite a few Everton fans in Liverpool as well, people who think, well, I'll do it for charity, but I'm not going anywhere near anything red. So that still holds true today. So you get so many color associations. I mean, talked a bit about orange and blue, and it's a great sort of default pair of associations, and it comes with Tableau as well, the first two colors you see. But it can be really difficult if you want to move away from red green, let's say, and you want to use an orange blue pair. What are the associations? I might first think of it as hot and cold. I mean, orange is good, blue is bad, maybe if you're talking about weather. But you know, you've got your red green associations as well with stop and go. Orange and blue a little bit close to that. Do I therefore think of, you know, maybe my orange is bad? It can start to get a little bit tricky depending on which way round you might sort of try and associate some of your colors, and it's not easy at all. This probably a lot of you have seen this, a famous example, the original from the South China Morning Post, and what I'm going to show you was something sort of presented by Andy Cotgreave. The original shows that just by using red and a sort of dark red and all these other visual metaphors that you can use, you can really sort of have a foreboding image and headline that tells a story of, well, it tells a story of death and blood and violence here. But just by making a few design changes, by turning around, making a nicer headline and font, and not least changing into a cool, more soothing color, you can really you can tell an almost opposite story using the very same data. So color can be so key just from our visceral reactions. If we see a soothing blue, we're not thinking of a bad news story. And there you can see the difference. You really are, excuse me, just looking at the same data in two different directions. Sarah mentioned this earlier. Here's a Chinese lady looking at a wall of green, all the stocks and shares results, but she doesn't look very happy. And the reason she's not very happy is we in the West might think of green as shares going up, and with only just a few reds there. But if you take a look at all the greens have got minuses. The green has a negative association in China and the red has a positive association. So she's actually looking and saying there's only very few stocks that are going up in red. The majority are going down in green. So it's not only a different association to what we might have here in the West, it's diametrically opposite. And you still have orange in the middle as you kind of, I suppose. And I think CJ showed us this Will showed us this earlier on. I won't show you this in much detail, but this shows all the different ways, or many of the different ways you can interpret colors in different cultures. This from Information is Beautiful. I mean, we can just take a look at one of them there. number 35. So each spoke is a different kind of association, and you can see that both red and green are associated with good luck there, and all the way around different things associated with different colors and different cultures. It's a minefield, really. There's another mention for Lisa Charlotte Muth, or Lisa Charlotte Ross, as she was known then. She looked into male and female and the different colors used to show the two different sexes, and this is about looking at some major articles around about that time, and it was about half and half, those that used red and blue or something, you know, quite close to it, and those that used something different. And it's interesting, I mean, blue and pink or red and blue, if you want to use that for men and women, you know, there's a strong enough association. You probably wouldn't need to have you probably wouldn't need to sort of describe that anymore. Excuse me. But you wouldn't need a color legend. But is it cliche? Is it sort of acceptable to still use blue and pink? I'm not sure. I cringe a little bit at blue and pink, and I love some of the suggestions on the right-hand side. Purple and green has the association with the suffragette colors used by Telegraph and one or two others there. And somebody, I gave this talk earlier in Birmingham earlier in the year, and a lady came up to me afterwards and said, well, everybody's blue and pink, and I actually don't mind being pink. Does this mean we have to start using different color schemes? And I said, no, of course it doesn't. It just means, you know, maybe there's something else you need to think about. Make your own personal decision. But, you know, it's an example of yet another thing that you might not have come across when you start your journey. And then finally, sometimes you just have to break all the rules. When I wanted to do something fun, and I wanted a different color for every song on my album, something I was going to repeat in a series of sort of eye-catching visualizations, I realized that I had 19 different songs, and there was no way I could, you know, follow the rules and stick to a sensible color palette. So sometimes just go for it. It doesn't matter what the rules are. You know, you can be eye-catching and fun with lots of colors. And similarly, if your colors have an association already, then don't break them. You can't do anything about the London Underground, let's say, or the lines on it without using exactly the colors that are already associated. So sometimes, you know, that will trump anything else you do. All right, so lots of questions, no answers, but, you know, one of the first things you learn about is color, but there's so much behind it that we learn all the time. You know, I've learned plenty more just this morning from earlier talks. My second chapter question in this was, why visualize using triangles? And it followed on from, you know, a couple of interesting visualizations that were doing the rounds, and I felt that, you know, a lot gets mentioned about circles in data visualization. You know, there's whole books on them, but what about triangles? We don't mention them very much. I mean, I guess they can be awkward in terms of what am I encoding? You've got different types of triangles. Are you looking at the length of each side? Well, that could be different in a triangle. Are you looking at from the base to the top? Are you looking to the area? It's, you know, it's not immediately obvious. So if physical accuracy and numbers that you're encoding are important, maybe triangles aren't the first thing you would go to. So similarly, if you're looking at areas, this was done to look at the difficulty of encoding a circle area, but the same valid point stands. And this is from Steve Wexler, with the research he was doing into the big book of dashboards and the big picture. You look at the top, if F is 100, what is G? And all right, okay, there's the correct answer, but only 39% got even the range of the correct answer there. And I actually got that one wrong when I entered it. And then if you look at the bar, if A is 100, what is C? You can see that almost 80% got that one correct. So we know it's easier to encode lines and bars or to interpret than it is other areas. But what other reasons might we have? Look at this one, a triangle. What percentage of the full triangle is the dark blue section? We're not hugely interactive here, so I won't wait for some answers, but it's very rare that people get this right when I've delivered this recently, or they don't get it right first time. I would think maybe, you know, is that about 50%, do we think? Okay, now let's have a look and look at this on the right. This is exactly the same triangle that I showed before, and we can see that was actually only 35% full. But if I was to ask you the question on this, you would say it's 35% full because it's annotated there and it's explained. So this was a brilliant visualization from the Washington Post, which looked at how dry reservoirs were becoming. And it's difficult to see the exact numbers on there, except that when you have the bigger ones, they're all pointed out exactly how full they are. So you can see by eye, it's a good visual representation. It's a good metaphor, because that's kind of how we would imagine a valley shape or perhaps a reservoir shape, or what it would look like as things started to go, as things started to dry up like that. So I feel this is a great shape to use. It was the right visual metaphor, and it sort of got a lot of interest and attention. And where it might maybe fall down analytically, it makes up for it absolutely by pointing all these things out and annotating them. Sometimes I think just triangles look great. This was another one that was doing the round from Christina Schuch, and she taught me how to say her name, Christina Schuch, I think. And it's since I've even published this talk, she won an Information's Beautiful Award for this and a whole series of animated sports visuals like this, and she just builds them up left by right to show something which is quirky, colorful, and geometric, and has lots of triangles in. And for me, that ticks all my boxes of whether something's interesting to me. You can read the scores. You can see on England versus Denmark there that first Denmark scored the first goal, and then England scored 2 more. It's not often I can show a visualization about England winning something, but the fact that it's triangles is almost incidental. It just gives something that shows that looks really great and is quite impactful. And poor Christina, she said she got a lot of requests about people saying, can you do this sport? Can you do that sport? And she happily did them all. I was a bit different. I contacted Christina and said, can I steal it and do it myself? And so I recreated the same thing for curling results at the Winter Olympics. And it's triangle after triangle after triangle, but it was just the way that I wanted to do it. And I feel like it really shows something fun, especially as it builds up with the animations. I also wanted to emulate, this is Sonia Kuipers on the left. She did a piece of work for Scientific American there, where for the different metrics she had, she decided to show a triangle base. Not, it's almost similar to those legs upside down, isn't it? The percentage of a small triangle in a big triangle. And she had squares resting on them. Now that might be quite hard to look at, but it becomes easier when you compare in a small multiple. So when you're comparing one versus another. So I contacted Sonia, and again I said, look, I'd love to try this in Tableau with the data set that I had that particular week, which was for the Operation Fistula initiative of Makeover Monday. And it's, again, it's a really great, interesting, different, fun way of visualizing, where you can compare and contrast across different countries. And sometimes the shape of your visualization, so the structure, ends up having to be a triangle. We can see by that, if I was to ask you, what's the mileage from, I don't know, Edinburgh to Dover, you can see it's 496 miles. If I was to ask you the other way around, what's the mileage from Dover to Edinburgh? You'd say, well, it's obviously 496 miles. We don't need that top right half. We only need half of the visualization here. So here's another example, and this is one of my own, where again, we only need that bottom left triangle part of the visualization. I'm looking at prices of a house, comparing the year bought versus the year sold. Now, the year bought is always going to be before the year sold. So the whole other half of the graph there is redundant. You're not going to have any that are sold before they are bought. So with that in mind, it then gives you a whole white area to make sure you're using for your explanations, for your keys, for your legends, for your annotations. And sometimes triangle charts are actually just what people want. I was contacted by Zan Armstrong when I was, I sort of got the conversation about triangles going. And she said, well, actually, I work with material scientists, and they love tertiary charts like this, triangle charts. It's a great way of showing composition of 3 different metals. We've got tin, we've got cobalt, we've got tantalum, and the colors show the different compositions. They show the amount of whatever that alpha 3.2 EV means. I don't know, because I'm not a material scientist, but people who are in this field and who understand it, there is no better way to them of seeing how compositions change as you look at the different amounts between three different metals like that. So there's always fields where things are more familiar to certain people than they might be to the general public. So as with anything in this talk, we're considering our audience and we're considering their literacy, data literacy. Finally, what's better than 3 triangles? About 3,500 triangles. This was something I did for Data Visualization Society, just to try and visualize the membership. And if you can see at the top there, that each one of my triangles is basically a spider chart. It is a radial look. But if you're only looking at 3 different metrics, so in this case, metrics which sort of summarize data, visualization, and society, then as I've sort of accidentally said before, a spider with 3 legs is really a triangle. And so once I decided that, I had something which I knew wasn't hugely analytic, but if I put them all together, and if I then just made them overlap, I got much more of a sense of community. The colors I used for the geographical positioning of each society member just gave it that bit more of an autumnal feel, and I ended up just having something in a way more by luck than judgment that looked like a forest. It looked like a really sort of close-knit community, and so these triangles started to look like trees and gave that close-knit sense, probably more than a dot or a circle or a square or anything like that would have done. So it's another way of where I think that particular shape just really worked. All right, so lots of different answers to the question about why we visualize with triangles, I guess, or lots of examples anyway. And my third chapter example is why visualize using flowers. And I realized as I was writing the book, or I was writing a blog post accompanying the book, that it's something I like to do a lot, and I've been inspired by all sorts of people. I'm going to sort of skip to where I quite often start talks with, which is why it's all to do with Tableau. This geometric art, this is Pete Mondrian, and I'm sure many of us have seen these kind of classic pieces of art that he does. But this one is actually, by coincidence, called Tableau #1. I love that sort of almost coincidence, and it comes from the fact that what actually is Tableau? Tableau, in English, these are the definitions online: a picturesque grouping of people, a striking scene. So it's really something that we can do using pictures to tell a data story. And then if you look at it in the sort of the French definitions as well, translated into English, you can see there's all sorts of methods as well. But again, you look at it as a board. And a tableau is a blank sheet of paper or a blank board. So it's really your blank canvas, if you like, to be able to draw your scene. And that just sort of inspires me, or sort of helps the penny drop that if you can draw it, then Tableau can create it for you. So if you can draw it using data, using dots or lines, anything like that, then Tableau will actually just be able to do it for you. So this by Yvette Kovacs and Istvan Koronpoy, one of the first of many that sort of inspired me to look at these kind of things. This was a small multiple looking at 100 top companies and the female representation in them, and she used just this petal look to give all this look of all these kind of different shapes of lopsided flowers that were all largely blue with not enough purple there. And it really, I love the way that it stood out and that it told a story, but did it in what I thought was a really aesthetically pleasing way. One of my own visualizations with flowers for Operation Fistula. In this case, I love the fact that I could also encode information in stalks and roots and things like this, and just using flowers just gave that organic feel, and to me, it's a represented life, and each one of these showed how life could improve on an individual woman if this sort of important procedure was they had the opportunity to undertake this important procedure to help with fistula. But going back to actually how flowers are created in Tableau, the reason I love them is they're like scatter plots, only better. Scatter plots, if you look at the center of each flower, you can encode using size, using color, position in X and Y, and maybe the shape of what you're plotting. But if you're talking flowers, you're adding petals and stalks as well. So you've got the position of a flower, you've got its radially where it is, its shape, more colors on there, and I've even encoded a stalk onto here. What I did here, this was to show the squad representation of the 20 Premier League teams last year, and there was just so many different ways that I can encode this. And similarly, here's another example. It's flower-like, if you like. These geometric visualizations, I want them to be artistic. I actually want the reader to do the work. I want to appreciate how it looks. And then if you want to know what is the data behind this, it's not just random, then you can look, you can find the encoding, you can find that elsewhere. So it's not something for a client presentation or a board meeting or anything like that. I'm whizzing through this excitedly, but obviously I've got my eye on the time as well. I'll make sure we finish. What I loved about this when I put it into a PowerPoint for the first time is, it interprets your alt text. So when I put my Tableau visualization in, full of my shapes, it describes it as a group of colorful flowers. And I thought, yes, that's good. I've fooled Tableau. I know they're not. I know that they're circles and ellipses and colors and lines, but I'd done my job. And I talk about this in more detail in another talk, so I'll just really skip over it. But this just goes back to the idea is if you can draw it with data, then Tableau is the tool for you. And in the case of flowers, when you're talking circles and ellipses and things like that, I'm afraid it means trigonometry. But if you remember that anything with a circle, just remember how it works. You're using sine and cos and the angle of the position where you want to plot it, then it all sort of becomes a little bit more simple. I always pull in a file where I join. So I use join equals 1, so that every single point in my data set, I can pull in whether it's 25 or 50, however many I want of individual points in order to make my curves or my petals for flowers. And that's a close-up version of it, just to show that everything, either you can do the calculations in Tableau or you can do them in the sheet that you pull in. It doesn't matter, but just sort of join so that you've got in my case, a 40-to-1 correspondence. How I do my petals, I can't remember how to do ellipses in geometry, but I do know how to do circles, and you can just squash them. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be too clever, because you just need to remember that you don't have to have the same scale on your axes. So that's how the petals work. And then once I've drawn them all in, we can then sort of encode them at different points around a circle and have lots of different shapes and sizes of petals. I can then never remember, how do you rotate something around a certain degree? Well, thankfully, if you look it up, you can always find that kind of stuff in Google, and you can apply anything X and Y to your calculations, just rotate them around, and then you get something that starts to look like a flower. Make sure you then put them in your axes and make sure that you fix them, and make sure that you've got the right proportions, and then all of a sudden you can start to plot your flowers. So I've whizzed through that because this isn't a how-to. This is more just sort of a celebration of the ideas that you can come up with, and then the fact that Tableau can help you put those ideas into practice. So to summarize, again, this is just the plan of the 3 stages. Think about the questions of your basic principles. Can I bend and break things? What other questions I haven't even thought of before, using triangles, things like that. Have I got a brand new idea? What are the pros and cons? Will my audience appreciate it? Will I learn from it? And then, so again, it goes back to thinking of Tableau as your blank canvas. And I update that slightly, but I think of it as a canvas of graph paper, because if you can plot it and draw it and do the equations in that kind of way, then honestly, there's nothing that it can't do for you. And whatever questions you have, that's what leads to your improvement in creativity and skill. All right, so that's the end of my talk. Thank you for listening as I rabbited on really quickly there. As you can see, I'm passionate about this, and if you have any questions, do catch me afterwards or right now. Or buy the book. It's great. It's 20% off. It makes a great Christmas present.